The afternoon sun streamed through the window, casting a warm glow across my living room. I found myself curled up on the couch, a half-finished book resting in my lap, but my mind was elsewhere. It had been a few months since the breakup, and while I had tried to enjoy my newly single life, the loneliness often crept in like an uninvited guest. I glanced at the family photos on the wall, Jake and I at the beach, him laughing as he splashed water at me, his little arms flailing with joy. I missed those days when life felt simpler. "Hey, Sarah, you home?" Jake's voice cut through my thoughts, pulling me back to reality. He stood at the door, his tall frame slightly hunched, as if the weight of the world was resting on his shoulders. At 17, he was still a boy in many ways. Yet the recent divorce between his parents had forced him to grow up far too quickly. "Hey, kiddo, come in," I called, forcing a smile. I could see the shadow of worry etched on his face. He stepped inside, kicking off his shoes and tossing his backpack onto the floor. I could tell he was struggling, but I didn't know how to reach him. "Do you want to watch a movie?" I suggested, trying to break the ice. "I just got that new superhero flick we talked about." "Yeah, sure," he replied, but his voice lacked enthusiasm. He sank into the couch beside me, his eyes glued to the screen, but not really seeing anything. I turned to him, searching for a sign that he was okay, but all I found was a distant look. "Jake, how are you holding up with everything?" I asked cautiously, not wanting to pry too deeply. He sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. "I don't know. It's just, everything's different now. Mom and Dad are always fighting, and I feel like I'm stuck in the middle," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't imagine how hard that must be," I said softly, trying to convey my understanding. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right?" He shifted uncomfortably, his fingers tapping nervously against his knee. "Yeah, I know. It's just, I don't want to burden you with my problems. You've got your own stuff to deal with." I felt a pang of sadness at his words. "You could never be a burden, Jake. Your family. I want to help you, but I can't if you don't let me in." He looked at me, his blue eyes searching mine for sincerity. "I guess I just feel lost. I don't fit in anywhere anymore." I placed a hand on his shoulder, hoping to offer some comfort. "You have a place here with me. You're welcome to stay as long as you need. Just say the word." After a moment of silence, he finally spoke. "Could I stay with you for a few days? Just until things calm down at home?" "Of course," I exclaimed, relieved that he felt comfortable enough to ask. "You're always welcome here, Jake." His face brightened a little, and I couldn't help but smile. "Thanks, Sarah. I really appreciate it." The next few days passed in a blur of laughter and casual conversations. We settled into a routine that felt almost normal, filled with late-night movie marathons and shared snacks. I reveled in the small moments, the way he laughed at my terrible jokes, the way we could joke about anything without the weight of judgment hanging over us. But beneath the surface, I sensed an underlying tension. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a current of something unspoken that flickered in the air between us. Late at night, when the world outside was quiet, I sometimes caught him staring at me when he thought I wasn't looking. and while I tried to brush it off as nothing, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were both teetering on the edge of something we didn't fully understand. One evening, after finishing a particularly hilarious movie, Jake turned to me, his expression serious. "Sarah, can we talk about something?" "Sure. What's on your mind?" I asked, my heart racing slightly at the gravity in his tone. I know things have been tough for us both, and I want you to know that I'm really glad to be here with you. You've always been like a safe space for me," he said, his words hanging in the air. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. "I feel the same way, Jake. You're not just my nephew. You're someone I care about deeply." He smiled, but there was an intensity in his gaze that made my pulse quicken. I didn't know it then, but that simple conversation would mark the beginning of a shift in our relationship, one that would challenge everything we thought we knew about family and love. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow through the curtains, I found myself in the kitchen, absent-mindedly stirring a pot of pasta. The air was thick with the comforting aroma of garlic and herbs, but my mind was elsewhere. I thought about Jake, his laughter, his struggles, the way he seemed to light up when we found common ground in movies or video games. But tonight, something felt different. I sensed a heaviness in the atmosphere, a shift that made me uneasy. After dinner, I heard him retreat to his room, the door clicking shut behind him with an almost definitive finality. I tried to drown out the worry gnawing at me with a mindless rerun of a sitcom, but the laughter from the television felt hollow. I glanced at the clock. It was already past 9. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was upset. With a sigh, I set the remote down and made my way to his door. I knocked softly. "Hey, Jake? Can I come in?" There was a pause, and then a muffled, "Yeah." I opened the door slowly. Jake was sitting on the edge of his bed, his head bowed, fingers intertwined as if he were trying to hold himself together. The sight tugged at my heart. "Hey," I said softly, moving to sit beside him. "What's wrong?" He looked up, his blue eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I don't know, Sarah. I just feel lost, I guess. Like everything is falling apart." I put a hand on his back, rubbing it gently. "It's okay to feel that way. You're going through a lot right now. Your parents' divorce, moving here. It's a huge change." He nodded, but the sadness in his gaze didn't disappear. "It's just, I thought things would get better, you know? But it feels like I'm just stuck in this weird limbo. I don't know where I belong anymore." I could feel his pain resonating within me. "You belong here, with me. You can always talk to me, Jake. I'm here for you." He let out a shaky breath, and I could see the tension leaving his shoulders, if only slightly. "It's just, I see you handling everything so well, and it makes me feel even worse. You have it all figured out, and I'm just a kid." "That's not true," I replied firmly. "I might seem like I have it all together, but I've had my share of struggles too. It's okay to not have everything figured out. We're all just trying to navigate this chaotic thing called life." He looked at me, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. "You really think so?" "Of course. You're strong, Jake. You've already been through so much. It's okay to lean on someone else for a bit. We all need support." He smiled faintly, and something in my chest eased. "Thanks, Sarah. It just helps to talk about it." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of our conversation settling around us. I watched as he seemed to gather his thoughts, and then he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been thinking about how much I miss being a kid, when everything was simpler." "Me too," I admitted. "Sometimes I wish I could go back to those carefree days, when the biggest worry was what cartoon to watch next." He chuckled softly, the sound like music to my ears. "Remember when you took me to that amusement park? I was so scared to ride the roller coaster, but you made me do it." "I had to. It was the best ride," I exclaimed, nudging him playfully. "You screamed like a banshee, but I was so proud of you for facing your fear." "Yeah, well, I still don't like roller coasters," he said, rolling his eyes with a grin. As we continued to reminisce, I felt a shift in our dynamic. The laughter and shared memories created a bridge, drawing us closer in ways I hadn't anticipated. But there was still an underlying tension, a current that connected us in a way I was hesitant to fully understand. Over the next few days, our bond deepened. I found myself opening up to him more, sharing my own fears and regrets, things I had buried deep inside. In return, Jake began to share more of his world with me, his dreams and aspirations, his insecurities about the future. He spoke of college, of his desire to travel, and I could see the flicker of hope reigniting within him. Then, one night, after a particularly emotional day, he looked at me with a vulnerability that took my breath away. "Can I sleep in your room tonight?" My heart raced at the suggestion, a mix of protectiveness and fear swirling within me. "Are you sure that's what you want, Jake?" "Yeah, I don't want to be alone right now," he replied, his voice steady but soft. I hesitated, the implications of my decision weighing heavily on my mind, but the thought of him feeling isolated, vulnerable in that moment, made my heart ache. "Okay," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You can stay." As he settled in next to me, the air between us thickened with unspoken possibilities, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this decision would change everything. The clock ticked softly as I lay in bed, the dim light from the bedside lamp casting shadows on the walls. Jake was curled up on the other side of the room, his breathing steady, a comfort in the quiet night. I had agreed to let him sleep in my room, thinking it would help him feel secure after everything that had happened. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken words, our earlier laughter fading into the background. "Remember that time we tried to make that giant fort in the living room?" I broke the silence, my voice barely above a whisper. I smiled at the memory, hoping to lighten the mood. Jake turned his head slightly toward me, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Yeah, and we ended up with more pillows on the floor than in the fort." I chuckled softly, picturing the chaotic mess we had made, our laughter echoing through the house. "I think Mom was less than thrilled about that." "Yeah, she was, but it was worth it," he replied, his voice reflecting a nostalgia that filled the room. "I miss those days, you know." "Me too," I admitted. Life seemed so much simpler back then. We continued to share memories, each story drawing us closer, weaving an intricate tapestry of our shared past. The closeness felt comforting, yet I was acutely aware of the tension simmering just beneath the surface. I could see how much Jake was hurting, and my heart ached for him. But in this moment, surrounded by the warmth of our recollections, it felt as if we were the only two people in the world. "Sarah," he said suddenly, his tone shifting, the weight of his gaze making me turn to him. "Do you think things will ever go back to how they were?" I hesitated, the question hanging in the air like a fragile thread. "I don't know, Jake. Sometimes things change, and we have to learn to adapt, but we still have each other." He nodded, but I could see the uncertainty etched on his face. It was as if he needed more than just reassurance. He was searching for something deeper, something I wasn't sure I could give him. And then, in a moment that felt both inevitable and shocking, our eyes locked, the air crackling with unspoken emotions. I could feel my heart racing, the warmth of his presence overwhelming me. Something shifted between us, and before I could fully process it, he leaned in, his lips brushing against mine. The kiss was tentative at first, but it quickly deepened, a whirlwind of confusion and longing. My mind screamed for me to pull away, to remind him of the boundaries we were crossing, but my body betrayed me, leaning into him, responding to the warmth of his touch. It felt like a culmination of everything we had shared, every moment of vulnerability and connection. When we finally pulled apart, reality crashed back in. "What just happened?" I breathed, my heart racing in a way I had never felt before. I don't know," Jake stammered, his cheeks flushed with embarrassment and something else. Desire. Fear. "I didn't mean to. I thought—" "Jake?" I interrupted gently, trying to regain my composure. "We need to talk about this." But the words felt heavy, laden with implications I wasn't ready to face. What did this mean for us? For our relationship? The rest of the night passed in silence, an unspoken agreement hanging between us. We both understood that everything had shifted, but neither of us was ready to confront the reality of what had just occurred. The morning light crept through the curtains, casting a golden hue over the room. I could feel the tension in the air as we both moved about, avoiding each other's gaze. The kiss lingered like a ghost between us, unacknowledged, yet impossible to ignore. "Hey, do you want some breakfast?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light, but it came out more strained than I intended. Sure," he replied, his own voice tight with uncertainty. As we moved through the motions of the morning, the unease weighed heavily on my chest. I felt like we were both walking on eggshells, each moment fraught with the implications of what had happened. I wanted to talk about it, to understand what this meant for us, but the words stuck in my throat, tangled with fear and confusion. We finished breakfast in relative silence, the air thick with the things we weren't saying. I glanced at him, catching his eye for a moment before we both looked away, the reality of our situation settling in like an unwelcome visitor. The kiss, the connection. It was all so complicated. I had always seen Jake as my nephew, my family, and now everything felt blurred. and I wasn't sure how to navigate the new landscape of our relationship. The evening air felt thick with unsaid words as I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall where Jake's presence lingered like a shadow. It had been a week since we crossed that line, a line I never thought we would. The kiss had ignited something in us both, something that danced dangerously close to the edge of what was acceptable. My heart raced at the thought of it, an intoxicating mix of guilt and yearning. Jake was in the living room, his laughter echoing through the house, but I couldn't bring myself to join him. I felt like a ship caught in a storm, tossed between the waves of familial duty and the pull of an uncharted desire. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, when suddenly the laughter stopped. I heard footsteps approaching my door, and before I could process my racing thoughts, Jake was leaning against the frame, a tentative smile on his face. "Hey," he said softly, his voice breaking the tension in the air. "You okay?" "Yeah, just thinking," I replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "What about you?" "I was just watching some old cartoons. They remind me of when we were kids." He stepped inside, his presence filling the room with warmth. "Want to join?" I hesitated, the weight of the past week pressing down on me. "Maybe later. I just need a moment." He nodded, but I could see the flicker of disappointment in his eyes. "All right. Just don't stay in here too long, okay? I don't want you to feel lonely." "I won't," I promised, though I felt like I was lying to both him and myself. As he left, I buried my face in my hands, overwhelmed by the conflicting emotions swirling inside me. The next day dawned, bright and sunny, but the light felt harsh on my skin. I made coffee, trying to ignore the gnawing anxiety in my gut. As I poured the steaming liquid, I could hear Jake in his room, his music blaring through the walls. I wondered if he felt as conflicted as I did. Did he think about that night? Or had he pushed it aside, pretending it never happened? "Hey, Sarah," Jake called out, breaking my train of thought. "You want to grab some lunch? I found this cool burger place online." "Sounds good," I replied, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. We headed out, the car ride filled with nervous energy. I stole glances at him, his hair tousled and eyes bright with excitement, and I felt a pang of longing. At the burger joint, we settled into a booth, the aroma of grilled meat filling the air. Jake was animated, talking about school and friends, but I couldn't shake the undercurrent of tension. He caught me staring and raised an eyebrow. "What's on your mind?" "Just everything," I admitted, my heart racing. "I've been thinking about us." "Us?" he echoed, the color draining from his face. "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean, Jake. That night, I felt the weight of my words hang in the air between us, suffocating and electric." He shifted in his seat, his expression a mix of fear and curiosity. "I don't know, Sarah. I thought we were just..." "Just what?" I interrupted, my voice rising slightly. "Just pretending it didn't happen? Because it did, and we can't just ignore it." "I'm not ignoring it," he shot back, his voice low but intense. I don't know how to deal with it." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. Neither do I. But we can't keep acting like everything is normal when it's not. The air between us thickened, charged with unspoken feelings. Jake looked down at his plate, his fingers tracing the rim. What if we explore it? Just a little more? My heart raced at his words, excitement and fear colliding within me. Jake, that's a dangerous game we're playing. We're family. I know, he said, his gaze finally meeting mine. But what if it feels right? I felt a rush of warmth flood my cheeks, the weight of his words settling deep within me. Did I want to explore it? Did I want to risk everything for a chance at something new? Something thrilling? Jake, I started, but he interrupted me. Let's just see where this goes, he urged, his voice steady. We can figure it out together. I felt my resolve wavering, the boundaries I had drawn beginning to blur. Maybe we could find a way to navigate this together. But as I looked into his eyes, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were teetering on the edge of something irrevocable. That evening, we returned home, the tension still simmering beneath the surface. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but wonder how deep this rabbit hole would go, and if we'd be able to come back up for air. The days following that night were an exercise in restraint. As I moved through my daily routine, I put on my best face, a mask of normalcy that barely concealed the chaos swirling within. Jake and I navigated the house like two ships passing in the night, exchanging light banter that felt more like a performance than genuine interaction. I could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, mirroring my own internal conflict. One afternoon, as I was folding laundry in the living room, Jake plopped down on the couch across from me. His gaze lingered on the floor, and I could feel the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air. I tried to break the silence. You think we should watch that new superhero movie tonight? The one you said looked cool? I offered, my voice bright and cheerful, a stark contrast to the tension that enveloped us. He looked up, and for a moment, our eyes locked. Yeah, I guess, he replied, his tone non-committal. But maybe we should just do something else. It feels weird, you know? His honesty cut through my facade, and I felt a pang of guilt. Yeah, it does, I admitted, my heart racing. I think we're both just trying to pretend everything's okay. Jake shifted in his seat, his expression darkening. I don't want things to be awkward between us. You're my favorite person, Sarah. His words were like a balm on my troubled soul, yet they also ignited a flicker of something deeper. You're my favorite person too, Jake, I said softly, trying to gauge his reaction. But we need to be careful. Careful about what? He challenged, his eyes narrowing. About how we feel, about what happened. I took a deep breath, the air thick with unspoken emotions. We crossed a line, and we both know it. We can't just ignore it. Why not? Jake leaned forward, his intensity palpable. What if it's not just a mistake? What if it's something more? I felt my heart race. His words hung in the air, challenging every notion I had about family and love. It complicates everything, Jake. We can't risk hurting anyone else. He leaned back, arms crossed. Frustration etched across his face. What if we're the only ones who matter? What if we're the only ones who feel this way? Before I could reply, the front door swung open, and I heard the familiar voices of Jake's parents filtering through the house. My heart sank. They were home early, and the last thing I wanted was for them to sense the tension that had built up between us. Jake's eyes widened in panic. "What do we do?" "Just act normal," I whispered urgently, rising to my feet. I quickly tossed the laundry into the basket, hoping to project an air of innocence. "Hey guys," I called out, plastering on a smile that felt more like a grimace. "How was your day?" His parents walked in, their faces a mix of fatigue and concern. "It was okay," his mother said, glancing between us. "We were just worried about you, Jake. You've been a bit off lately." I could feel Jake stiffen beside me, the tension between us palpable as he avoided his parents' gaze. "I'm fine, just busy with school," he muttered, his tone defensive. His father raised an eyebrow, skepticism clear in his expression. "You know you can talk to us about anything, right?" "Yeah, I know," Jake replied curtly, his frustration evident. As they continued to question him, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The walls felt like they were closing in, and I could sense that Jake was becoming more isolated with each probing question. I wanted to intervene, to defend him, but I knew it would only raise suspicions. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, his parents retreated to the kitchen, leaving Jake and me alone again. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched on his face. "This is impossible. I can't keep pretending." "Neither can I whispered, the weight of our unspoken feelings pressing down on me. Just then, a thought struck me. A family secret long buried, one that could change everything between us. "Jake, do you remember when we found that old photo album in the attic?" He looked at me, curiosity piqued. "Yeah, I remember. Why?" "There was a picture of your mom and her aunt, right?" I hesitated, unsure if I should continue. "They looked really close. I always thought it was interesting." His expression shifted, confusion mixing with intrigue. "What are you getting at?" "I just wonder if there's more to that story than we know," I said, my heart racing. "What if this kind of thing runs in the family?" Jake's eyes widened as the implications of my words settled in. "You think my mom?" I nodded slowly, the reality of our situation hitting us both hard. We weren't just grappling with our feelings. We were part of a pattern that had echoed through generations, one that blurred the lines of love and family. In that moment, I felt a connection deeper than ever, yet tinged with fear and uncertainty. We were standing on the edge of something profound, and I wasn't sure if we were ready for the plunge. The air in my living room was thick with a mix of anticipation and dread. Jake and I had spent the last few days trying to process the revelation about his mother and her relationship with her aunt. It felt like we were walking through a fog, unsure of what lay ahead, but acutely aware that the path before us was fraught with danger. I glanced over at Jake, who was staring absent-mindedly at the television, though I could tell he wasn't really watching. His mind was far away, wrestling with the implications of our own situation and the family secret that had come to light. "Sarah," he finally said, breaking the silence with a somber tone. "Do you think what happened between my mom and her aunt, does it mean we're destined to repeat it?" I swallowed hard, the question hanging in the air like a heavy cloud. I don't know, Jake. I think every situation is different. We're not the same people they were, and we have to be careful. We can't let that history define us. He turned to face me, his blue eyes searching mine for answers I didn't have. But it's in our blood, isn't it? His voice was barely above a whisper, as if saying it too loudly would make it all too real. What if we can't help it? Jake, listen. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. Just because something happened in the past doesn't mean it has to happen again. We have the power to choose how we act. Do we? He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. Sometimes I feel like we're just puppets, like we're acting out a script written long ago. His metaphor hit me hard, and I felt a pang of sadness for the burden he was carrying. I know it feels that way sometimes, but you're not a puppet, Jake. You're your own person. You can decide what you want for your life, for your relationships. He nodded slowly, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. Just then, my phone buzzed on the coffee table, slicing through the tension like a knife. I picked it up, glancing at the screen. It was a call from my sister, Jake's mother. My stomach dropped. Jake, it's your mom, I said, my voice shaking slightly. I should probably answer. Yeah, sure, he replied, his expression unreadable as I pressed the button to accept the call. Hello? I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Sarah, my sister's voice came through, frantic and laced with emotion. I need to talk to you. It's important. What's going on? I asked, my heart racing. I found something, she said, her voice trembling. Some texts between you and Jake. I need to understand what's happening. My mind raced as I exchanged glances with Jake, who was now sitting up straight, eyes wide. Texts? I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. What kind of texts? The kind that suggest there's more going on than just him staying with you, she snapped. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but I need you to be honest with me. I felt the weight of her words crashing down on me, and I could see Jake's face pale. He was clearly terrified at the thought of his mother knowing anything. Okay, I said, my heart pounding. Let's talk. Is Jake there? She asked, her voice low and serious. Yes, but... Put him on the phone, Sarah. Now. I hesitated, glancing at Jake, who looked like he might be sick. Jake, I said softly, she wants to talk to you. He shook his head vigorously, panic creeping into his features. No, please don't make me. But I knew I had no choice. The truth was out there, and there was no escaping it. I handed him the phone, my heart racing as I watched his expression morph from fear to resignation. Mom? He said, his voice cracking slightly. As I watched him speak, my mind raced with the implications of this call. I could feel the walls closing in around us, the consequences of our actions looming larger than ever. Sarah? Jake's voice broke through my thoughts, pulling me back to the moment. I don't want to do this. I took a deep breath, knowing our lives were about to change irrevocably. I know, Jake, but we have to face it together. The tension in the room was palpable as I realized that what was about to unfold could shatter everything we'd built and leave us standing among the ruins of our relationship.